We are live. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony DiGiovanni, and welcome to another town hall meeting. What a difference a few weeks make. Many of you were sitting at home a couple of weeks ago wondering about the future of your business. Now most members can't keep up with the pent-up demand. I'm hearing that many of you can't find employees. Others are saying that the lack of available daycare is making it difficult for employees to get back to work. However, most of you are busy and thankful that revenue is coming in. In the busyness of the spring season, many of you may not be paying as much attention to the long-term health of your business. This is why we asked renowned business consultant and coach Jeffrey Scott to be with us today. Jeffrey has helped many of our members maintain profitability through all kinds of economies. He is a popular speaker at our events and has unique insights based on many years of providing exemplary information and business coaching services to a North American audience. Jeffrey has also contributed his knowledge, time, and perspectives to our Choose to Grow Forward webinars. We're fortunate to have Jeffrey here today. Jeffrey will talk about setting up your company to deal with the new reality of the economy, how to pivot into the future, I love that word, pivot, and how to deal with all the success you will have if you take the proper action despite uncertain times. Jeffrey is always an optimist. After Jeffrey's presentation, we'll open up the webinar for questions. Joining Jeffrey for the question period are members of our COVID task force, Alan White, the chair, David Wright, who's the president of Landscape Ontario, Peter Ganane, and Jamie Riddell. So let's get started with the presentation from Jeffrey Scott. Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I want to speak just briefly about some things you've heard before and some new information, and then wrap it all together in a way to think about it and take action to help you not only this year, but next year. So just a reminder that this economic cycle recession that we're in, or some would even call it a depression, right? You've heard that word. It's different from 2008. 2008 was a humdinger of a recession, the Great Recession, right? And that was based on on consumer overspending, overborrowing, I should say, and the real estate bubble. Now, what we have here is sort of man-made, right? We just flipped a switch and boom, we brought this recession on ourselves. The homeowner, though, was in much better shape, psychologically, financially, and I think we're really seeing that now with the big demand that's already happening. So as we pull out of this recession, some are calling it a depression, right? As we pull out of this, it's going to be also consumer driven. Now, when I started addressing COVID a month ago, or is it 2 months ago, maybe? I was saying that it would be a V-type recovery. So V means, you go down and then you come back up within 12 months. And I also said back then that the news was going to get a lot worse. No matter what you heard in the news, a month ago, 2 months ago, it was going to get worse. And you read the papers like this weekend, my God, I want to just kill myself reading all the headlines. That's how newspapers sell their product, right? With these extravagant headlines. But what I was saying a couple months ago is when the news gets really bad, that's actually when we're going to be in the middle of the turnaround. The economy will be pivoting when things look their bleakest and when the news is bad. And so given how bad it is or has been in the past week or two, to me, that's good news. Bad news is good news. That means, okay, we're going to start coming out of this. So I am still a strong believer in a strong turnaround. Now, we can't really predict the future, right? We can only guess. The good news is that we can make our own future. And I'll tell you what I mean in a second. In reality, the economy is stratified. Like if you're in the event planning business, you've got no business, not for the next 18 months even. And good Lord knows what's going to happen to it. If you're in the bar business, well, restaurants are opening up, bars not so much, not yet at least. If you're in the landscaping business, hallelujah, because your businesses barely got shut down, they're back up. And certainly in residential, you're booming. And so it's a real stratification of what's going on in the marketplace. And so I think that's going to tell the story for the recovery. I think it's going to be very piecemeal, depending on the part of the country or continent you're in, and what kind of business you have. It's interesting, Tony, that I'm seeing residential companies doing better than commercial companies, which is kind of a switch. Generally, people get into commercial because it's more stable, more consistent. It's maybe easier to sell the business when you're done, maybe fewer headaches. But what I've seen is there's more doubt right now in commercial than there is residential. It would be very interesting for LO to do a survey of its members and really see how that's playing out across your country. And if that's true, is it anecdote or can we back it up with data? It seems to be all the anecdotes are backing that up for me. It would be interesting, though, to do a survey on that. A recession is a zero-sum game. So when you're in a recession, the economy contracts, and when somebody wins, it's because somebody else is losing, right? You're taking a limited amount of business from one. You're all going after a limited pie, right? So when you get your piece of the pie, somebody else didn't get theirs. An economic boom is a non-zero-sum game, meaning there's money for everybody. Everybody's winning. If you're fishing, you put the fishing pole in, grab out a fish. Fishing pole in, grab out a fish. And you don't have to think as hard about managing a business in a boom economy. So I think it's interesting. If you look at the better companies, they treat a boom like a recession, and they treat a recession like a boom. Meaning the better companies, even when things are booming, they put on these forced constraints on their company, stretchier goals. Let's get more efficient. Let's try new things. They continue to experiment. They're always looking for more efficiency, maybe implementing lean management, and realizing that when you have the boom economy, it's not a time to be lazy, but a time to really take advantage and try new things and experiment, and forced discipline on the company. And then in the recession, great companies realize, well, now it's a boom, because another word for a recession is a decline, right? It recessed. And so things are cheaper in a recession, right? Equipment's cheaper. If you're going to buy a company, it might be cheaper in the recession. And so I think a great company that have built up a great balance sheet realize, well, now's the time I can shop for deals and really take advantage in spending money. And so it's interesting how we normally think of recession and a boom, but how it kind of, if you flip it on its head, it gives you insight into what kind of strategy you should have. So in a recession, this means you've got to work harder, smarter, get more efficient. Right now, everybody's booming, right? There's this pent-up demand. It's hitting the market, and people are just struggling to keep your head above water and get the business. You don't want, though, to lose sight for the opportunities here for really improving your efficiencies here and for making money and saving money. I got a call from a coaching client last week. He's like, Jeff, I have more money than I've ever had. I don't know what to do with it. Tell me how to spend it or what I should do with it. And then the next day I'm on the phone with another client. They're both about 5 million. He said, I have $900,000 in the bank. I've never had that much money in the bank. And so it's kind of everything's flipped on its head. Now, these are two U.S. companies. I think in Canada with the government support, you're going to see similar things, right? You're going to see with the economy growing and the government infusion and cash is going to grow. And so I'm always a big believer in building up your balance sheet. Dave knows about that, right? We talk about that incessantly. And so now you still can. If you got cash coming in, don't just follow what your accountant would tell you to do. Don't just go spend the money, but conserve the cash. Don't don't just think, hey, woohoo, we're having a party here. Continue to put efficiencies in place, conserve the cash. You can still look for deals, right? For equipment, you can probably negotiate better deals, better interest rate terms. Can we delay paying for that piece of equipment? Can I get 0% for the next 3 years? There's some crazy terms out there. So even if you're feeling flush, and many of you will with cash, you should still treat it like you're going to need it, like it's money for the future. You can't spend it now because we don't really know what's going to happen. We can't really predict the future. If you look back in past pandemics, there were repeats, right? There was it would come out, the pandemic would spike, and then there'd be a second spike and a third spike. If I had to bet, that's probably going to happen. And then it's going to cause a bit more chaos in the future. We don't really know. We've never had a time where all the doctors in hospitals and research facilities have been orchestrating across the globe to find a cure. So we also have the best chance of ever of actually beating this thing. But, you don't know. Maybe it's going to mutate into something else, something worse. Anything can happen. And so I would tell everyone to treat all their success as a bit of luck mixed with a bit of smarts and hard work, and you never know how long the luck is going to last. So keep your pedal to the metal, but keep striving for efficiencies in your business. And like I said, if you're thinking of expansion, now is certainly a good time, but don't throw that money away as it comes pouring into your business. Still a time to pivot. Tony's favorite word for the month here.
That was your word.
Yeah, I love this word. We both love this word. Yeah. It's still a time to pivot. You have to. I spoke to this client with $900,000 in cash. Commercial business, not much is happening. Residential business is booming. And so just 3 months ago, we were talking about growing his commercial side of his business, where he had this plan in place. We're pivoting. The residential side is growing. We're going to be able to hire easier to grow that. We have some growth plans in place. We're going to make it happen. And he's outside of New York City, and people are leaving the city and they're going to the country. So for him, it looks like a longer term trend. Pivot to where the growth is happening. Pivot to those clients. Pivot geographically where you see the growth happening. Pivot using technology. I have a client, I've spoken about them before. They are a garden center, and they put the whole thing online. They did it in 2 weeks. And their sales went and they're in a city where they get hit by a tornado, Nashville. So their sales went down, boom, right back up. And so now they realize, this technology works for garden centers. It's amazing, really, because now you can just be lazy and buy online like we do with Amazon. And so the business really spiked, but they're realizing we could probably put our landscape business online. And, more than just, I've seen in some Ontario companies, without naming names, where they have the build your landscape online, right? That's sort of the trend. So more than just that, but really putting more and more of the business and interfacing with the client online. So a lot of opportunities for pivoting here, especially if you're willing to try new technologies and just experiment with new ways of doing business. So I think I've given us a few things to chew on there. There's my 15 minutes.
You had a quick question, Jeff, as you were kind of doing it. One of the exit questions, we know pandemic's different than an economic market correction or the typical recession that businesses would see. This is a global impact on economies, and it's uncertain how it's all going to play out because of the way one moved across and impacted not just people's lifestyles, but how commerce around the world, and even now how moving product around the world has changed. But how bold should one be during a period like this? Because we've always heard that term, in the greatest challenges come the greatest opportunities. But knowing that pandemics have this inevitable kind of curve or cycle, and we also have this underlying knowledge that we don't think government can support us all the way through these cycles in the US or Canada, how would you advise us to look at risk management? how do you spend too much, impact your balance sheet, not preserve your cash? Because 2 months ago, was a big term we were talking about. Should we still be doing that, or where's that balance point from your perspective?
Al, what a great way of throwing 4 or 5 questions into one question like that. Well done here. This is like
I'll let you go for another 10 minutes. So
it's like a verbal SAT test. All right, I think I got it all here.
Alan's good at that, by the way.
Yeah, he's really good. So
it's not to preserve cash, take advantage of.
No, I got it. Nothing more. No, that's good. The government shut down the economy and then intervened to bolster the economy. There's a little bit of schizophrenia, really, right? And then in Sweden, they decided not to shut down the economy and to give clear directions. And I guess the Swedes are good at following directions and listening to their governments. And so I do think we're going to have some more spikes of some kind. The question is, will we have to shut things back down again or not? I think we're going to have learned a lot on how not to just clamp things down where it really hurts the economy. And I'm hoping we're a lot more prudent as we move forward. So that's my hope, Alan, that as we do kind of bounce through this, and I think it's going to bounce a few times, that the government won't have to come in and flood the market with money in a counterbalance, right? It's like when you go to the doctors and they give you some medicine that's going to kill you almost to cure you, and then they give you something else to counterbalance the medicine. Hopefully we won't have to go through that wackiness where we're going to require the government to step in. That would be my hope, that we get smart enough not to do that. I think it's a little bit individualistic. So if you have a really strong balance sheet and you've been conserving cash for a while, I started up a podcast. I don't know if you started listening to that, Alan, and I had Bob Grover from Oregon. Mm-hmm. And after 2008 economy, he said never again. And so he's been systematically cleaning up his debt. So when we came into this, debt free, right? Now he can really maneuver. So I would look to building up extra cash, but I think you always want to be bold in a couple ways. One is having a strategic plan where you know what's that next person I need on my team, and or what's that better person I need on my team, right? So either addition or replacement. And I think you always want to be bold when there's a good person that wants to come work for you on the market, making that move. When you're tiny, you can't do that, right? With 3-4 person company, but you get to a certain size and the whole thing shifts. And then bringing in a great person makes you more money, makes everything work better. So I would continue those bold moves. If you see your market shifting, like I said, with the nursery going online and the clients were there online, but they weren't in person. So I would make bold moves to where you can get that short-term return right from your clients, right in the same cycle, let's call it the same spring or same summer, same fall. If you're in the mode of buying businesses, no, not everybody is. If you're not, don't go out and do that. But if that's been part of your plan, maybe to diversify, now's a great time to continue doing that. Mm-hmm. So back to you, it depends on the definition of bold. And if you want to throw out a few more examples, we can bat those around.
Some companies, as you alluded to, were already doing a little cash preservation, saying after 2008, that's not going to happen to me again. But I've talked to lots of companies, that young and old companies, over the last 2 months, that we've been living a pretty solid economic wave for the last 10 years. And cash preservation wasn't as big a deal. So some, again, new companies and old companies felt the pinch when the economy shut down.
Yeah.
So they already didn't have a great balance sheet. So the advice is a little different. When you have obviously cash on hand and your balance sheet's solid, it's pretty easy right now to be making decisions. But if that wasn't the case, and we're more trying to create opportunity and advice for the guys that really are feeling the pain of the last 2 months. What should they be working on right now when you have all this noise, all this uncertainty, plus all this pent up energy? Is there things they should be doing, caution they should be taking, or advice for companies that are kind of living on the edge?
So this is a year to understand cash flow and cash flow management.
Mhm.
And, you know, we've spent a decade learning how to put together a better budget, thanks to the Ontario landscape software company, right? Who is really the leader in this. I would say the leader in building software to help us figure out our P&L. And so I think we've done a good job as an industry figuring that out.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of the work I do is helping people learn how to use it, put it into a monthly format, et cetera. And I think now is the season for cash flow management and understanding how to manage your money by cash flow and in making improvements in the business so you can improve the cash flow. And then you've got the balance sheet, which is about saving the money, right? Keep more of it than we give out, build up the equity in our balance sheet. And so that's I think there'll be a change there because a lot of people just listen to their tax accountants. Hey, we should lower our taxes because we're growing, and so we're just going to plow it back into the company. I would say that too many companies did that little willy-nilly, right? Not, you know, because you're in a boom economy, right? So you don't have to really think as hard about it. So when you get this wave of cash coming, sit down with your accountant, hopefully he's a CPA, and come up with a goal for how much money we want to have saved up in the company before we feel safe to spend more of it. So I guess that's a long way of saying set some savings and balance sheet goals to hit and do a better job of weekly cash flow management and set up some 13-week rolling cash flow projections so you can kind of predict your cash and track it. You may not need it right now, but you will in the next, when this peak of demand subsides and you have to start managing real numbers again in your business.
And that'll really help companies that are, when these opportunities, and there will be opportunities as there always are in crisis markets, and ones that obviously are as pushing like they are right now on our sector's demand. But if you're managing your cash flow well, then you can certainly take advantage of that opportunity without creating undue risk.
Yeah, Jeffrey, is there a rule of thumb in how much cash you should save up in your balance sheet? Is there
a ratio?
No, that is such a good question. Is there a rule of thumb? It's really, people have different risk tolerances.
Right.
So there's a debt to equity measurement. So that's not really cash, but it's debt to equity on the balance sheet. And if your debt to equity is higher than 2.5, let's say, or 3, you're in high risk territory. If it's down as far as low as 1 to 1, then you're fairly, you're in a low risk position. Some people want it to be below that even. And so they're really conserving cash. So I would look at debt to equity as one goal. In terms of cash in the bank, let me think about a goal in that. Some people say that, you should have 10% of revenue or 20% of revenue in your bank. And so I think you have to look at both cash and maximizing cash, which also has to do with better management of AR.
Right.
But that's it is different from your debt to equity, which is how leveraged is your balance sheet. And I would say you really want to manage both.
Right.
Yeah, we ask the other panelists. I know in our company, we try to keep about at least 1 month cash reserve on our sales production. So if you're generating $250,000 a month in revenues, we try to have $250,000 of cash.
So that's like 8%, right? So that's a conservative. In this day and age, though, you might want more.
And I would also say our lines of credit also equal our sales forecast. So on a monthly basis. So whatever our monthly.
Now you're at 16%. So that's my 10 to 20% there.
Right.
Yeah.
Jamie, Peter, David, do you want to, while we have Jeffrey here, do you want to ask any questions? Do you want to give us some of your perspectives in terms of keeping your business solid?
Sure. I'll just talk briefly about managing to the numbers, and I know that it's something that I've worked with Jeffrey on for a long time. And I've always understood the reason behind having a budget. That always made sense to me. You're planning. But how do you stick to that budget? How do you manage to those numbers? I'm on my 6th budget for this year because of the ups and downs of this thing. And, I went into it, what is the worst case scenario? So I came up with a worst case scenario budget. Well, that one's still sitting over here. I haven't touched it. And then I did another budget, and thanks to LMN for the ability to, throw out budgets like this, like you're throwing out a deck of cards. But I could do all these different scenarios. And even last week, my VP of operations gave us 2 weeks notice. So now I have a new budget. I'm saving on a salary. I'm working, spreading some money amongst my employees. I can see by looking at my budget how much money I'm saving by not having that salary. And I can give a few people some raises and change their job descriptions. And in the big picture, I can see that we're going to make a little bit more money this year if this budget comes true. But then I also have this other budget of what I was aiming for coming into 2020. And it's how to adapt to those trigger points. When do I switch to these different budgets? And and keep making sure that I'm watching those numbers and making my decisions based on what my budget says. And that's what I struggled with for a long time, but I sort of finally figured that out. So
Yeah.
So Dave, that's a pretty interesting approach. So how do you actually do that logistically? Like, do you look at, so you've got your 6 or 7 budgets that you've done. Do you look at them monthly? Look at them weekly? How do you do this?
it's been weekly.
I want to hear the answer to this one.
It's actually been weekly.
Weekly?
But as something happens, I'm developing a budget for what, I may not go back to them, but I'm on this on my 6th active budget that I'm working on because things kept changing. And as fast as they were changing, let's do another budget. Let's do another budget. So hopefully what I've got planned out ahead in my budget reflects the reality of what's going on. And so, in the past, I would adjust my budget quarterly. It used to be just, every year, and whether I hit it, I didn't, did I hit the budget? No. Oh, well, we'll change it this year. Then I got into looking at it so that we would adjust actually quarterly to try and then with the help of Jeffrey using his rolling budget, it was looking at it monthly and being able to work to a budget monthly and adjust accordingly to hit your end goal, or at least know where you're going to end up.
I want to hear Jeffrey on the. I didn't think we're allowed to adjust budgets, but I agree.
How do you manage a business without adjusting a budget?
I agree with Dave that I think you need to always be looking at, because it gives you the reality to see where you're actually living in relation to your budget, and then when things change, you have the ability to see where reality fits with it. To know, to your point, Dave, I think is the point. Can I pivot? Can I change something? Can I add to something or augment it? So. I think some call it changing the budget, some call it reflecting on the budget, some put the reality, the actuals to the budget. So yeah, I agree with it. That's kind of the way we look at it too. If you know what it is and you look at it weekly, you know when you have to pivot or don't, or if a pivot comes or an opportunity that we just talked about previously comes, can I apply that into the metrics that I had already previously kind of worked out?
So Alan, you're doing it weekly.
We're doing a form of it. So my cash flow is my bigger one, and I compare it to our actual productivity to see how we need to do all those operational pivots. And sometimes it's creating more expense to finding, to what Jeff said earlier, the right employee, paying more than I would for something, or a new piece of equipment comes along that my desk that wasn't in my budget originally, but sales are crazy and we're exceeding budgets all the way along. Yeah, I can take a bigger risk, but if I'm not exceeding budget, yeah, you should be a little more cautious about taking advantage of that opportunity right now, or you better understand how it fits into your new reality of why you're not meeting the budget you kind of set out already. So whether you call it 6 budgets or you call it a constant reevaluation of your actuals to a budget, and adjusting where you want to go. This is a year where you have to do it a lot more frequently.
Well, you might actually change your budget if you were going to change your pricing. So if something dropped and you had to change your overhead recovery, how you distribute it, then you would literally change your budget. I think Dave also mentioned, I think this is important, is having a monthly budget. An annual budget only gets you so far, right? And so the key that everyone has to really take to heart is having the discipline to create a monthly budget that's accurate. But then you can live in monthly compartments, and that's a lot easier to manage than in a big annual compartment.
Yeah, we've redone our budget monthly just because of the existential threats that are flying at us with the government changing policies. But cash flow we do weekly, and the nice thing about visiting those budgets is you understand better what you have to drive toward. So early on, in March, we realized cash flow was going to be a potential problem. We didn't know if it was going to be a month or 2 months for the shutdown. So we made our adjustments then for refinancing some of our debt. And so the fact that we've been allowed to work, we're actually in a better position now than we would have been without the shutdown and the government subsidies and having to reorganize all this debt. So we're in a weird position, right, where we've done all those steps, and our cash flow is actually in good shape. But we still want to revisit that regularly, so we're prepared for a second wave if that happens, or if I have staff that get sick and have to shut down crews, I'm going to lose productivity pretty quickly. So we're constantly anticipating a worst case scenario, and I think it's getting this virus into our company is right now our biggest threat.
Yeah.
So it's the common theme is like watching your numbers, knowing where you are here. Jamie, do you want to add anything, or did you want to?
I was just going to say from our perspective, we can watch revenue targets on a daily basis, and we can analyze them on a weekly basis, seeing what our real costs come in. Ours are monthly, but what I've had to spend a lot of time doing is understanding what the daily, weekly, and monthly trends actually mean, right? So is it actually growth? Are we actually growing our business, or are we pulling business forward, or back, or are we pulling business that we lost in April into May? So really sitting down and understanding, are our customers growing and is their spend growing, or are we just reallocating the weight of our budget through different periods of time in the year? And then understand, being up over budget in the month of May after a poor April can give you some false confidence in that you think, oh, we're up on budget, we're doing a great job. Well, really, you got to dig for those for the little pieces in the rough, or the smaller percentage of the business that you've lost, right? It can give you a false sense of confidence that everything's good, we're doing amazing, we're not losing customers. Whereas if you don't do the deep dive and get very analytical, you can overlook some pretty big potential losses. So it's really great to identify trends, but it's even more important to understand the trends and understand every aspect of the trend, and then make decisions based on that. That's why I like seeing the costs on a monthly basis versus seeing the revenue on a daily basis. It allows me to digest these things before seeing how the costs come in on the other side.
Okay.
The question I had, Tony, was our members were asking about it last week, but last week's call a little bit. The costs of COVID and these new protocols. Some people, it's one person per truck, so you send in 2 or 3 trucks to a job site. Some of it's the extra PPE, whether it's masks, gloves, cleaning job sites, sanitation, extra Johnny on the spots on site. Like, there's a whole bunch of costs that are just added to everything that aren't going to be recoupable. And then we haven't even got into, some of us are feeling at the medium-sized business and higher, the number of people coming in with potential illness. So all of a sudden one person or crew gets knocked out for 2 weeks. So these are all costs that weren't forecasted. We're looking at our cash flow, but I think there's some apprehension in the marketplace, one, to charge for these. Do we absorb them? How do you put them? What are your thoughts and suggestions of how we put these into our pricing structures for the short term and the long term, as we anticipate this is probably at least a 12 to 24 month reality that we're going to be living in our businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some are recommending to track those costs separately so you can actually see them. I don't know how practical that is, but if you can put a line item in your budget so you know what those extra costs are. That, otherwise you can't charge your clients, and then you can't see how you can't compare year to year when there's a blip going on with the costs. So if that's easy enough to do, I would do that. The whole point of this government intervention is really to add some buffer to that. And so I think it's hard just to add. If you could add those costs, you would do it anyways, right? Unless you have a clause in your contract where you can, commercially just pass it on, and your client's going to accept it. I mean, let me turn it around the other way. If your client was going to accept it, you'd probably do it, right? So
I think part of the question is a social one too, in your experience of business and coaching. There's two sides. One's obviously expense in the bottom lines of business. The other is the marketplace. Its confidence levels, as you look at commercial, is probably actually a little more eroded than residential, but still the concept of COVID and being a pandemic, being trapped at home, while it's stimulating some markets like garden centers and our sector from gardening, at the same time it's still seen as a negative. So adding it or trying to put it in when you're in kind of recession, depression, market downturn, when normally people will be tightening their pricing and spending, it's kind of an anomaly, and you don't want to rub it the wrong way, or you run the risk of actually hurting your business and obviously market opportunity by kind of stimulating the wrong.
I'm seeing it situationally, so I'm not seeing it across the board yet. Mm-hmm. I'm not hearing my clients saying that it's a common factor at all, but I am seeing it situationally where the client has requests that in order to fulfill that request, there's going to be a certain cost, and I'm making you aware of that cost, client, and I'm passing that on to you more in the commercial world. So I am seeing it situationally, but by no means am I seeing any trend of that happening yet.
So I'd like to ask that question to Peter, Dave, and also Alan, who started. So what are you doing? Are you passing on those extra costs, or are you just eating them?
We have not. Yeah.
Okay.
We have not. The optics of having an additional charge to our clients would feel a little bit rough. I mean, everybody's struggling right now, so the optics of hanging that on our clients would be difficult. Jeffrey's right. The government subsidy is offsetting some of my additional costs. And one of the things we did as more of a midterm, I guess, approach is we've adjusted our production rate calculators so that if I was able to do 120 square feet of stone with a crew a day, flagstone or something, and maybe we can only do 100 square feet of stone every day now. So my estimates are reflecting some additional time overall for the job. So there isn't really a difference in the appearance to my clients. But, in the fall, when the government subsidies have dried up, I'm hopefully going to be able to get paid for the hours that my guys are going to take to do the work.
Yeah. So the message there is know your costs and be able to pass them on holistically.
That's it, exactly. Know your costs.
Yeah.
I hated it when the fuel prices here were $1.40, $1.30, $1.40, and even before that, trucking companies were charging a fuel surcharges. Well, now we're paying 80 cents a liter for gas now, and those fuel surcharges are still in the bill. And the surcharges never go away. To me, it's a money grab. I agree with them, and sometimes I just don't pay them. Depends on the supplier, because sometimes I think they're not warranted. I wouldn't put that to my customers. I wouldn't put a COVID-19 surcharge. I know approximately what my costs were, hard costs. My soft costs, I don't know. And there's a soft cost in the in efficiency and the fact extra training and stuff that we had to do. That's a whole lot harder to track. But certainly a hard cost. I know exactly what we spent on toilets for our trailers and hand sanitizer and that kind of thing. And in the big picture, that's just more PPE. So it goes under that line item. I could put a new line item in my accounting, but I just know in the back of my mind approximately how much this is. And at this point, it's not enough to justify putting some kind of extra charge. But it's being covered in all of my new quotes going out the door are paying a different rate than they would have last year. So.
Yeah, ours is similar to Peter's. It's factored into our labor costs. Things are taking longer, more training, more separated town halls and their tailgates in the morning. So all these segmented things are adding a burden, but it's safety related, and our crews aren't as efficient as they go through all this PPE. Part of our company goal is to make it more and more efficient each time we learn from it, each time we practice it. So there's a little bit of that going on, but it is different. So when you're looking at, especially a smaller company, what's a straight income and expense, and you have all these extra expenses coming in, sometimes it's a question, how do we recoup these costs? Now it's, again, a little bit surreal with the market being all this pent up demand, but to Jamie's point is, some of that pent up demand is we didn't get out early, so everybody has high expectation and just is a massive workload right now.
Yeah. We've got the audience has a question. Michelle Wessel has a question. Does Jeff have any feedback from his landscape clients regarding lost business so far or weaker sales forecasts? What are you seeing out there, Jeffrey?
Well, I am seeing weaker sales in some commercial sectors.
Okay.
And stronger in residential. So right now, I'm not really seeing. Well, that's the only weaker sales I'm seeing. But maybe I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, I think I think Michelle's just trying to get at what's the forecast, an economic forecast, and how it's going to affect the industry. Have businesses? We started late. Are we going to make up for that?
As my dad told me over and over and over again, make hay when the sun shines.
Right.
So if you're having an excess demand now and you're like up to here, learn to swim a little higher and grab a bit more of it, because nobody can predict.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we're seeing in the marketplace, Tony, is there's been a pullback on high-end residential, so big capital investment in property. And again, some of those players would be working upper management in big commercial companies, big financial companies, where you may not. I think there's some uncertainty as to what bonuses look like, what their sales forecasts look like. They have the ability. They're living at home. They're working from home. It's just on the blue collar worker, the kind of middle class. I haven't felt it, and I haven't heard it from our clients in respect to that. But some of the bigger GTA clients, we're hearing a little bit of pullback. The guys that are getting $1 million on landscape might not be. They may hold off for a year or two. So,
but you personally haven't seen a lot of it in your company?
No.
Peter, you're mostly high end, aren't you?
Yeah, and we're lucky in that our pipeline is often a year, 2, 3 years down the road. So those people that spend $1 million on their landscape, they're building a $5 million home. They started last year, and I'm doing the landscape next year. Right. So where we'll find the real pullback for my customers is probably is a year after this thing starts. Same thing happened in 2008. My sales bottomed out in 2009, 2010, 2011. That's where there was a dearth of high-end construction, because I'm getting it after all the construction is finished. And right now there's a lot of projects that got started a year ago or 2 years ago, and that train has left the station. That money is virtually pre-spent when they committed to doing this job. Money is cheap, so they all have access to cash. There's tons of money flying around and at low interest rates. So people who have committed are going to follow through. I mean, we still have people signing up for huge contracts, but that could dry up in a year or two if the economy slows down and slowly grinds down when the government pulls back their infusion. But we'll see that in probably 2 years from now, a year to 2 years.
Jamie, what are you seeing? You see a lot of contractors. Are they losing contracts or?
Oh, it's been an extremely overwhelmingly positive message, and so my message has always been, how many projects from 2021 got pulled into 2020, right? Somebody was going to go on vacation this year and do the backyard next year. So, that pipeline for 2021 or 2022 for the medium-sized to small-sized landscape projects may be getting eaten up now while cash is good and interest rates are good. So for 2020, everything I'm hearing is extremely, extremely positive. And that's really great. And there's even a lot of people talking about booking into 2021. But when I look at what we're planning for, is we're looking, what do we expect 2021 to be with pulling all this work forward and then a slow start in 2020. If the interest rates stay where they are and the economy stays as well as it's going right now, I think we'll be okay. But 2020 is a great, very optimistic outlook, and 2021, as everybody knows, is uncertain, but certainly feels optimistic at this point.
I mean, people aren't spending money on trips. They're not spending money on food, like on restaurants.
No.
I had a bunch of people ask me, well,
Yeah.
what are you doing for the summer? I said, well, to be honest, I just saved thousands of dollars from my kids not playing baseball.
Yeah.
Right. So what did I do? I'm going to put a new walkway in. I'm going to put a putting green in my backyard. Right.
You're happy about that.
You know what I mean?
No,
And
that's
I got my weekends back. So, I think for now, for 2020, I think there's going to be substantial investment in the homes and around staycations and things like that. You can't even rent cottages right now. So as Jeff said, make hay when the sun shines. This is our year.
And it also means don't get lazy on the marketing and sales development side.
Yeah.
Just because everything's pouring in doesn't mean you shouldn't get better and smarter at the marketing and sales side, because if we, remember, a contraction becomes a zero-sum game, and you better be better at the marketing and sales side when the economy does dip.
If you don't market and prospect in good times, that's what drives a sales slump later, right? So, you're busy and you've got lots of revenue now. You've got to be looking, like as Peter said, his pipeline's 2 and 3 years out, right? He's bidding jobs 2 and 3 years out. We've got to be prospecting 2 and 3 years out. We've got to be looking forward, even in the best of times, the busiest of times. You got to be building for the future.
Yep.
Maybe, Tony, while we have a couple minutes left here, we've talked about the sales side, the business side. You alluded a little bit, Jeff, to employees, talking about HR. It's been both south of the border. You're in the south, so I don't know. You always talk about north of the border. HR North America wide has been an issue.
Yeah.
Some of us thought maybe with all this unemployment that it would be better. We're actually finding the exact opposite. Now it's subsidies here for wage relief, both in companies and for individuals, is pretty strong in Canada. But we're finding work doesn't seem to be the problem. Finding employees incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Any advice, any wisdom from what you're seeing, something we should be doing with, like, there's never been this many people unemployed ever before, but it's not helping anything? Or is there a way we should be approaching it, or a trend or a thought that we could share with the members that might help?
My son lives in Holland, which sometimes I think of as the other Ontario, right? You have so many Dutch in Ontario, but and over there they fed all the money through the companies to keep people employed, whereas we, and I guess you, try to straddle it, and it really caused this bifurcation and just confusion in the marketplace. Shame on us. We should have done it the way they did it in Europe and just feed the money to keep everybody employed. So it's just chaotic south of the border down here, where we also speak English and Spanish. It's just as confusing. I mean, long term, you have to become a destination company. Thanks to Dave Wright, who helped coin the title for this book 10 years ago. And anybody online, I will send you a free copy. If you go to jeffreyscott.biz/free book, you can download a free copy. And you've got to build an alternative company, a company that's an alternative for someone to want to go work at. Again, when you get the boom, it then becomes that zero-sum game for finding employees, right? And so now you've got to be the better choice.
Yeah, we have our director of education. She calls it become an employer of choice. So same kind of idea.
Well, I like Dave's title better, but sure.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, you're here, so we're going to take advantage of you here. So you see a lot of companies. What's the biggest mistake that you've seen, like repeatedly, over and over?
I love this question. The biggest mistake is making the wrong hire.
Okay. HR based.
Well, it's a part of HR, making the wrong hire, either because you're desperate or distracted or just not realizing what it takes to vet properly an employee. And once you bring the wrong person into your company, man, the upset and the cost and the process to work through it and then to move them out of the company or to shift positions, that cost and opportunity cost both is significant.
Yeah.
So if you can avoid making the wrong hires, you're going to be so much further ahead than everybody else.
So any tips on how to avoid making the wrong hire?
Well, there's a great book that I tell all my clients this. That's an excellent book for recruiting, for interviewing in that process. And let me see if I have a copy of it here. I probably do somewhere. The book's called Who? Oh, here it is. This book right here.
Yeah. Solve your number one problem. Okay.
This is the Bible. It's the best book I've seen that gives a process for that interviewing process so that you don't make the wrong initial hire. And then I use personality profiles and other things like that. But I would start with this book.
Okay.
And hook up with a good personality profile. That's just a tool. It's just part of the process, but it helps with the higher levels. I once hired somebody that was a big mistake. Big. I can't even tell you. In fact, I'm legally not allowed to tell you what happened. And then we finally did a reference check afterwards. This is back in my younger days. And it turns out the problem we had with this employee, they had the same problem. If I had only done that reference check. Now, legally, often you're not allowed to do that, right? Or you're not allowed to give the reference. But if it's a great employee, they're going to tell you. And so you can read between the lines. There's different ways to ask questions. So you still want to go through the basics, including the reference checking. Really is my point.
Yeah, I want to go to the chat line for a minute. James talking about how we've got a lot of support from government for student and wage subsidies and so forth, but because of the cost of insurance, he still can't afford to hire. How do you answer something like that, a situation like that? So especially on the snow end, the cost of insurance.
That might be a Canadian question.
Yeah.
It might have to do with Canadian laws there.
Yeah.
The insurance companies are charging a lot for any driver that's under 25 years old. So I have the same problem in my company too, is where we have trouble having drivers because the insurance company wants to charge extra to let them drive the truck.
Yeah.
So what James was saying was that his insurance company wanted $9,800 for licensing or for insuring that young driver. So the government's willing to give you money to hire these people, but you can't hire them because you can't afford to pay the insurance. But I guess you could take the money that you were getting from the government to pay the insurance. So there's the other way around it too. So
yeah. So it's not a free employee.
No.
In theory, those in a free market, everybody suffers from that same problem. So is everybody suffering from that same problem?
Yeah, everyone's suffering from the same problem.
Yeah, the insurance is the second biggest issue we have in Ontario anyway.
For snow or for
generally?
Snow, but
In general.
Yeah. Especially for snow, but generally, we're trying to figure out how to deal with it. But
so in theory, everybody has that same cost, is what I'm asking or saying.
Yeah. That's right.
So then it comes down to somebody is not really pricing. They may not know their costs or be confident with them, or they're not confident in charging what they really need to charge.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that also, that's an unexpected cost, right? So if, for instance, if James was planning on employing people over the age of 25 and the insurance was $1,500 versus $9,800, right? Like, how do you pivot on that quickly? It's hard. It's really,
especially with a small company.
Yeah, it's a smaller company, and even with subsidy, it's still hard to eat $10,000 just to have drivers.
Yeah.
And you can almost afford to have somebody else drive the people around. You can't. But so I don't know how you overcome an extra $8,800 for insurance, and that's crazy.
Yeah.
I think and again, Jeffrey, you're on the call today, so I can plug you a little bit, but I think it's really timely the piece you sent out this morning, your newsletter. Those that aren't subscribing to your newsletter, I think should. But is your landscape company financially accountable? The 7 steps of that accountability, I think, was super helpful. I think, as Dave's mentioned a few times, it's knowing your numbers, spending the right amount of time, even when you're all busy, to pull yourself back into the office, and work on the right pieces of it. Don't just look at them, but as many here today have said, is go over them, put different scenarios at them. It's going to be a really fluid market for the next 12 to 24 months, both from an economic standpoint, a global economy stability, and then we really don't know that much more today than we knew 2 months ago about this pandemic, other than we're not out of the woods yet. So it could work out really good in our favor. It could go sideways, and there's no real rhyme or reason as to why New York was different than Saskatchewan. But we do know it has its own mind. It does its own things. There's certain things that we don't have control, but what we do have control is knowing our numbers.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, asking the right questions, in reaching out to your peers. This is a time to be asking lots of questions, to be understanding to how to do things different, because there is great opportunity right now. Don't be reckless in taking that opportunity, because that could hurt you with this instability that's still kind of unforeseen in the future.
And there are a lot of people that want to help too, which is wonderful in an association community setting. So that's what we found out.
Another thing that was really well said from Dave was, challenge your budgets. He's got 6 of them. He's challenging himself to look at these things differently. He's challenging himself to get more creative. Looking at numbers is one thing, but challenging yourself to look at them differently and understand them and give them different perspectives. That's commitment, and it takes time, but it's worth it in the end.
Yeah. So Jeffrey, any advice on your life lessons on balancing life, business, the reality of stress, and the reality of being incredibly busy? How do you find that balance? How do you work on the right things?
Yeah. Somebody asked me that today. So I have a practiced answer here. I think you have to find your kind of like an energy balance. And I don't mean that like woo-woo, but because we have peaks, right, in our business, and then we go on vacations, we have peaks. But how do you feel balanced every day? And so to me, that means working out, which I have not done today, and it's been on my mind all afternoon. That means relaxing and feeling good about what we did today. Every day I end the day with my wife, and we talk about our successes, sometimes our problems will come up, but we try to end on a positive note, and we share successes with each other. Turning off the phone, you can get hooked on just staring at it, and that alone will give you a headache, right? So I think it's kind of like these micro balances and micro energy boosts, like working out. I have a bike here right around the corner, and so even if I can get on for 15 minutes and sweat out for 15 minutes, then I feel better. And so finding it in these little spots where I can, and I think has a lot to do with the day-to-day balance. So hopefully something in there to help you, Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just from my perspective, all the people that I admire are not balanced, including you, Alan.
But there's a different kind of balance, and I talk about it, and it was from a book that Jeffrey made me read. It was The One Thing, and it's the pendulum, and I've talked about it in my president's messages about great things happen at the extremes. This is an extreme right now, but great things happen at the end on the swing. When it's in balance, nothing is happening because you are in balance. But it's your own interpretation of what balance is, really.
Mhm.
And
We could probably spend a couple hours on this question.
Oh, well, there's so many different theories, but this is the one I'm going with. So.
Okay. Anyway, our time's up, so I'm just going to make a few concluding remarks, and thank you, audience, for attending here. And so I just want to thank Jeffrey Scott for being our guest today. Jeffrey has always been very generous with his time. He's a consultant that's very effective, and he also cares a great deal about his clients' success and the industry in general. So thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you also to Alan White, David Wright, Peter Ganane, and Jamie Riddell. Together with Jeff Olson, John Dursey, Margot Byers, Terry Childs, and Lindsay Ross, they are members of our COVID task force. They've already met 40 times during this crisis, looking after your interests, looking after the profession's interest. Their contribution ethic is really inspiring, and all of them are really unbalanced. So they have their own business, but they make time for the community. To conclude, I want to say a few words about safety. We are fortunate to be one of the first professions allowed to work. We took out a full-page ad in the Toronto Star thanking the Premier for trusting us to work safely. Many of you are following safety guidelines on social distancing and vector control. You reflect professionalism and care for your employees, clients, and community. However, there are many in the industry that are not paying attention. We are witnessing trucks with 4 or 5 passengers crowded together with no one wearing masks. We are observing employees eating lunch together with hardly any space between them. We see employees working too close to each other. Early this year, President Dave Wright encouraged everyone to become safety companies that happen to be in the landscape business. It is important for so many reasons to listen to Dave. COVID cases went up last week. Our privilege to work is at risk, so please continue to work safely. Please encourage others to do the same. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.